Hey guys, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about what we've been doing over the last few days, and then explain how we're going to use that for our work for today. We have been looking at the economic indicators where you looked up what the definitions of those indicators are, and then you also did a little bit of research to find specific data and information about countries. And we're going to be taking that information today to talk about and to figure out how developed is a country. All right, so that's what our focus is using those economic and social indicators in order to assess how developed a country actually is. So let's go through some of this. Okay, so the economic indicators, it's the gross domestic product, it's your imports, it's your exports, and it's your per capita GDP. So we have the definitions of those, but how are we actually going to be using them is our focus for today. So gross domestic product. What this tells us, it's the overall production of a country. Okay, that is goods and services, right? How much manufacturing is happening, how many services are actually being sold, and that's for the entire country. So anytime that you make a product or anytime that you provide a service to somebody, when you get paid for that, that payment goes into the overall total for the country, right? That gets included in the numbers for a gross domestic product. Okay. Now imports. This tells us how many products um, a country actually purchases from other countries. Okay, now it can be purchased for a couple reasons. The major two reasons that a country would purchase them from another country is because they don't have the ability to produce that particular good in that country, right? Um, so if you don't have oil in your country, you're going to need to import gasoline, you're going to need to import oil from another country because you don't have access to it, right? The other reason that a country will import something is because they might be able to make it cheaper, okay? So think of how many products we actually import from China, right? The reason we do that isn't because we don't have the ability to make those products, but it's because China can make them so much cheaper with their manufacturing process and a lot of times, right, the lower the lower wages that they pay their workers. Okay, so that is imports. Export, that tells us how much is actually being sold to other countries. Now, this is always a surplus, right? If you need bread, if you need food, or right now, if you need toilet paper, right? We are not going to sell the toilet paper that we have to somebody else because we need it, right? And so whenever you sell to another one, when one country sells to another country, that is a surplus, right? So that is above and beyond what that country needs, and then they are able to sell it for a profit to other countries. Okay, the countries that have really high exports are the ones that have figured out and become masters of mass marketing, right? Of mass production, of producing a lot of goods. Okay, and then per capita GDP, this is the idea that um, everything in your country, but it's on average. Okay, so it's what is the GDP per person? Okay, so on average, each person would produce this amount of money on a yearly basis. Okay, one thing that you can use this right for is uh, to kind of figure out average income. Okay, so it's not exact and it's not perfect, but the per capita GDP is kind of connected to a person's average income in that country. Okay, then we have our social indicators. Right? These are the things that tell us about like what is life like in that country. Right. The first one is urbanization, and that talks about how many people live in cities. Okay. Second one is literacy rate and school life expectancy, where it's talking about education and how well educated people are. And then we have infant mortality rate and life expectancy, which both analyze and give information about the healthcare, right? What is the healthcare like in that country, or how healthy is that country? Okay, so specifically, right, urbanization, it'll tell us how much people have access to community, right? How much access they have to things like services, okay? Or how much access they have to a more developed way of life, okay? So that is what urbanization looks at. Okay. Literacy rate and school life expectancy. These are both indicators of the education level, right? It could be the value that a society puts on education. It could be the access to education, the ability for people and their kids to become educated, right? Is used with school life expectancy. One other thing that this is really useful for is to find out how equal or how unequal is a society. So, for example, um, if a country has males, right, they have a school life expectancy of 12 years, right, and females have a school life expectancy of 4 years, right, that shows us that there is inequality in that country, right, that males have more access to education, or that females, right, they don't have as much access, right, they're being required to do other stuff. Right? A lot of countries they'll have it's more cultural to stay at home and help their parents with housework and things like that. Okay, so this is a good indicator of the inequality in a society, and it's not just for gender, but it can also be used when you look at demographics, right? Things like race and ethnicity to see if people have the same access to education between races, right? To show diversity. Okay, and then I'll do these last two together, but we have infant mortality rate and life expectancy, and both of these show us about their healthcare. Okay, infant mortality rate is more about their access to medical professionals. Okay, because when you're able to see a doctor when you're giving birth to a child, um, the likelihood that that child is going to survive is way higher, right? If you can't get to a doctor, or if there's not doctors available, then the mortality rate, or how often those babies don't survive birth, right, is much higher. Okay. And then life expectancy, that's where we're looking at just the overall health. How much access to medicine do they have? What's their healthcare system like? Right? Is it a society where culture there's more physical activity, right, to keep people healthy? Right? That's kind of uh, that's an indication of the healthcare of that country. Okay. And all this leads to, is this country developed or is it developing? All right. And that's what we're going to focus on is developed countries are the countries that have more products available to them, right? They have more ability to produce products, right? In the picture on the left here, you see a very modern society, right? It's one where they have technology, they have products, people are all together, right? People generally they're looking fairly healthy, right? But there's a lot of access to things in developing countries, or in a developed country. I'm sorry. On the right side is an image that shows developing countries, and these are countries that don't have as much access, right? They don't have as much access to things like healthcare. They don't have as much access to like resources that they can use to produce products. And so what you find is in developing countries, production is a lot lower, right? So that GDP is going to be a lot lower in a developing country. Okay, healthcare is a lot lower, right? The healthcare isn't near as good, so life expectancy is going to be shorter. Um, the right infant mortality rate is going to be higher, right? Those things in a developing country. Same thing with education, right? There isn't going to be as much access to education. A lot of times in a developing country, kids don't have the ability to go to school. Um, they get put to work, right, very early because a lot of times their families, right, need money. And so they'll put their kids to work either, right, at an actual job where they're bringing home money, or they're going to be doing, right, field work, right, where they're growing food, right, and contributing to the family in some way. And so what you're doing today on your assignment is you are going to be looking at each of those indicators and you're going to explain what would that indicator look like in a developing country and what would it look like in a developed country. So for our example of a gross domestic product, okay, in a developed country, right, GDP is typically going to be high because they have resources, they have manufacturing ability, right? They can produce more goods and services. Okay? So GDP will be higher in a developed country. In a developing country, GDP is usually lower because either there's not as much access to resources, right? Or they don't have the manufacturing ability that they need if you're going to produce a high number of products. Okay, so that's one example that you can use for how to do your work, right? So you'll also be looking at what is healthcare like, right? So life expectancy, what would life expectancy look like in a developed country versus in a developing country, right? Life expectancy in a developed country is probably going to be longer because you have more access to healthcare, you have more access to medicine, okay? Where in a developing country, right, if you're living in this house right here on the right, right, you're probably not as concerned about just how healthy is the food. You're more concerned with, do you have food? Okay. So that's one of the differences between developed and developing country with healthcare and food and that kind of stuff. All right. And then the last thing to think about on this is development is totally on a scale, right? So developing country all the way up to developed country, it's not just 2 points on a line. There's space here, right? And here. So if you have a country that sells a lot of products, that has high manufacturing, but their healthcare isn't very good, or things are unequal with education, they're going to be more along, more around right here, okay, kind of towards the middle where they're not really, or I'm sorry, on this side, they're more developed, but things aren't maybe as developed as they could be, okay? So it is a scale that you're going to be on. So the United States, right, is over here. They're a fairly developed country where when you looked at Mali yesterday, right, they are one of the lowest countries in the world in terms of their level of development. Okay, not very developed, so they're going to be down here. Where a country like, right, India is going to be kind of more in the middle, right? Where India, you have a lot of products being produced, right? But there's still some things within society that are missing, within their communities that are missing. So they're more towards the middle, leaning towards being developed. Okay. Now, if you have questions, make sure that you reach out to me so that I can help you out with this. I know this requires a little bit of explanation, and it's a lot of thinking, right? It's thinking about what would this look like if a country is highly developed? What would it look like if a country is developing or is not very developed at all? So, like I said, reach out to me if you have questions, and I will do everything that I can to help you out. Okay, have a good spring break, you guys, and we'll see you in about a week and a half. Take care.